You're doing everything you were told would make you financially successful. Yet something still feels wrong. The money comes in, the life looks fine, and somehow you still feel behind. What if that uneasy feeling isn't a failure, but a warning you're misreading? Have you ever had this moment in your 30s where you pause, look at your life, and feel something quietly unsettling creep in? You're making more money than you ever have before. On paper, things should feel stable, responsible, adult, and yet, somehow, your bank account feels thinner, not thicker. One unexpected expense hits and suddenly you're asking a question that scares you more than you want to admit. Where did it all go? It's not that you're reckless. You didn't blow it on luxury or impulse. The money disappeared into things that don't feel optional. Rent or a mortgage that quietly doubled. Childcare that costs almost as much as housing. Flights, weddings, birthdays, obligations you couldn't really say no to without feeling like a bad friend. A bad sibling. A bad adult. The money didn't vanish. It dissolved into the life you were told you were supposed to build. And here's the part that hurts the most. When you look around, it feels like you're the only one struggling. Everyone else appears to be moving forward effortlessly. Buying homes, traveling, upgrading their lives. Meanwhile, you feel like you're running in place. Working harder just to stay where you are. That gap between what your 30s were supposed to look like and what they actually feel like is where a lot of quiet financial anxiety lives. Most people don't talk about it. They just assume it means they failed somewhere along the way. Welcome to Quietly Broke. If this feeling sounds familiar, you're not broken, and you're not alone. This channel exists to talk about the part of money no one brags about. The part that feels confusing, heavy, and oddly shameful even when you're doing your best. Before we go any further, if content like this makes you feel seen, understood, or even just a little less alone, take a second to subscribe to Quietly Broke. It's the best way to support the channel and help us keep making honest conversations about money that don't talk down to you or sell you fantasies. Now here's something I want you to sit with as we move forward. This video isn't about budgeting hacks or quick fixes. It's about understanding why this decade feels like financial quicksand, and why that feeling might not mean what you think it means. So let me ask you a simple question. Which feels closer to your truth right now? A. I'm behind financially because I made bad decisions. B. I'm overwhelmed financially because too many things hit at once. Comment A or B below. If that question landed uncomfortably close to home, it's because it points to something most people never stop to name out loud. The problem might not be you at all, but the season of life you're in. Your 30s are often described as the decade where things are supposed to come together. The reality is almost the opposite. This is what many experts quietly call the messy middle. And it earns that name honestly. It's the only phase of life where nearly every major responsibility shows up at once and demands your attention, your energy, and your money. Career pressure intensifies because you're no longer learning in theory. You're expected to deliver in reality. You're supposed to move up, earn more, prove that you were worth the investment. At the same time, family responsibilities expand, children, or the cost of preparing for them, parents who suddenly need help, health, insurance, stability, all becoming real instead of abstract. And layered on top of that is social pressure. Not loud pressure, but constant pressure. Quiet benchmarks everywhere you look. Homes, weddings, promotions, milestones that seem to signal whether you're on track or falling behind. Even if you know intellectually that comparison is unfair, emotionally it still lands. It still stings. What makes the messy middle so dangerous isn't the chaos itself. It's how easily that chaos gets misinterpreted. People assume that if life feels this heavy, something must be wrong with them, that they missed a step, that everyone else figured something out they didn't. But the truth is far less personal and far more structural. This decade is hard because it's dense. Too many life events compressed into too little time. Financial systems built for stability collide with lives that are anything but stable. Nearly everyone who eventually builds long-term financial security passes through this phase. The difference isn't that they avoided it, it's that they didn't let the confusion convince them they were failing. They understood, sometimes only in hindsight, that feeling overwhelmed was not evidence of incompetence. It was evidence of growth happening in multiple directions at once. The messy middle doesn't mean you're bad with money. It means your money is being asked to do a lot at the same time. And when people don't understand that, they don't just feel stressed. They feel ashamed. They disengage. They stop paying attention because paying attention hurts. Naming this phase matters because it changes how you interpret your own experience. Once you see the messy middle for what it is, you stop treating temporary pressure like a permanent verdict. And that shift alone can change everything about how you move forward. Once you understand that the pressure you're feeling is part of the messy middle, something important happens. You start questioning the story you've been telling yourself about being behind. Because that story is powerful. And it's usually wrong. One of the quietest lies people in their 30s carry is the belief that everyone else has already figured money out. That there was some invisible orientation you missed, where the rules were explained and the path was laid out. From the outside, it looks convincing. Friends buy homes. Coworkers talk about investments. Social feeds are filled with upgrades, progress, and stability. It creates the impression that you're lagging while everyone else is moving forward. But when you step back and look at the actual data, a very different picture appears. Most people in their 30s have far less saved than you probably assume. And even when net worth numbers look decent on paper, much of that value is tied up in things that don't help with day-to-day reality. Cars, home equity, assets that look impressive but don't translate into flexibility or peace of mind. The amount of cash and long-term investments most people actually hold is surprisingly modest. There's also a timing illusion at play. Many people don't begin investing seriously until their early 30s. Sometimes later. Large financial milestones tend to happen much later than social narratives suggest. If you've saved anything at all, if you've invested even imperfectly, you're not late. You're participating at roughly the same point most people do, whether they admit it or not. What makes this illusion so convincing is comparison without context. You're comparing your full financial reality, including stress and uncertainty, to other people's curated outcomes. You see results without seeing timelines. You see milestones without seeing trade-offs. This misunderstanding spills into how people think about compound interest. It's often described as magic, but it doesn't feel magical at first. Early on, progress looks slow and underwhelming. For years, most of the growth in your accounts comes from your own contributions, not from the market. That's not a flaw in the system. That's how the system works. Compound interest doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly. It builds in the background while you're busy living your life, paying bills, raising kids, and handling responsibilities. The acceleration comes later, often long after people expect it. And the people who benefit most from it aren't the ones who felt confident early on. They're the ones who didn't quit during the quiet years. The real danger isn't slow progress. It's mistaking slow progress for failure. Once you stop doing that, you stop making decisions out of fear. You stop trying to catch up in risky ways. And you give your past efforts the credit they deserve. You're not watching nothing happen. You're watching a foundation form, even if it's still underground. Once you stop mistaking slow progress for failure, the question naturally shifts from what am I doing wrong to what actually works in a decade like this. Because building wealth in your 30s isn't about executing a flawless plan. It's about staying engaged while life keeps interrupting you. This is the decade where your best intentions collide with reality. And reality rarely follows spreadsheets. You can do everything right and still have months where nothing seems to move forward. That doesn't mean your system is broken. It means your life is full. This is why persistence matters more than precision. Financial progress in this season rarely looks like a straight line. It looks like forward motion, followed by a pause, followed by a step backward while something urgent demands attention. The people who build long-term stability aren't the ones who avoid these interruptions. They're the ones who return to their plan after each one without turning the setback into a verdict about themselves. Emergency funds play a much bigger role here than most people realize. They're often framed as boring or unproductive because they don't generate returns. But their real value isn't growth. It's margin. When you have cash set aside, you buy yourself the ability to respond instead of react. You avoid the spiral of bad decisions that come from urgency. You don't have to turn every problem into high-interest debt or long-term damage. In a chaotic decade, that kind of stability is a form of progress in itself. The same principle applies to how you invest. Your 30s are not the time to make your financial life more complicated than your actual life. Complexity often disguises itself as sophistication, but it usually creates friction and hesitation. The goal isn't to prove how knowledgeable you are. It's to keep your money working while your attention is pulled in a dozen different directions. Simple, automated strategies succeed precisely because they don't demand constant involvement or perfect timing. There's also a subtle but powerful inflection point that shows up as your income grows. Raises feel like relief at first, a sign that things are finally moving in the right direction. But they also create a choice that most people never consciously make. You can let your lifestyle expand to absorb the increase, or you can let your future benefit from it instead. The difference between those two paths rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It shows up years later. Lifestyle inflation doesn't announce itself as a mistake. It feels reasonable. Earn more, spend a little more, enjoy life. But when every increase in income is matched by an increase in spending, nothing actually changes. The people who quietly build wealth do something less exciting. They keep their standards mostly the same and redirect the extra toward investments and savings. Over time, that gap compounds into real security. Wealth in your 30s is built through decisions that feel almost invisible when you make them. Small, repeatable choices, boring systems, a willingness to keep going even when the progress doesn't feel impressive. That's not a lack of ambition. It's an understanding of how this decade actually works. And when you step back and look at those small, unglamorous decisions together, something important becomes clear. Money was never meant to be the scoreboard of your life. Somewhere along the way, we started treating finances like a measure of personal worth. As if higher numbers mean you're doing life correctly and lower numbers mean you missed something fundamental. That mindset quietly turns money into a source of pressure instead of a tool for support. But money has only one real job. It's supposed to help you build a life that makes sense to you. Your 30s are full of moments that don't show up on balance sheets. Careers take shape. Families begin or change. Relationships deepen. You make choices that trade short-term comfort for long-term meaning. Or sometimes the opposite. And both are human. Reducing this decade to a net worth graph misses the point of why you're working so hard in the first place. Building wealth doesn't require you to hit someone else's timeline or replicate their path. There are countless valid ways to move toward financial security. Some people prioritize owning a home early and accept years of tight cash flow. Others rent longer and focus on flexibility and investments. Some aggressively eliminate debt. Others balance debt with investing. None of these approaches are moral judgments. They're reflections of different values and circumstances. What actually determines outcomes over time isn't which path you choose, but whether you stay consistent with it. Comparison erodes that consistency. It introduces doubt where none is needed and urgency where patience would serve you better. When you stop measuring yourself against people you can't fully see, you regain the clarity to make decisions that align with your own life. Most people who eventually reach financial stability remember their 30s as confusing and heavy. They remember feeling behind, uncertain, and overwhelmed. The difference is that they didn't disengage. They kept showing up, making reasonable choices, and trusting that progress was happening even when it was hard to see. If you're here, thinking about money and trying to understand it instead of avoiding it, you're not failing. You're doing the quiet work that matters. And one day, when the noise fades and the foundation finally becomes visible, you'll recognize this decade for what it was, not a detour, but the beginning. When you step back and look at everything we've talked about, a quieter truth starts to emerge. The discomfort you feel around money in your 30s isn't a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're carrying a lot at once. This decade compresses responsibility, expectation, and comparison into a short window of time, and it creates the illusion that progress should be obvious by now. In reality, most of the work you're doing is invisible. Foundations are like that. They don't look impressive while they're being built, but everything that comes later depends on them. The deepest lesson here is this: financial stability is rarely the result of one brilliant decision. It's the outcome of many ordinary choices made consistently, especially during periods that feel messy and uncertain. Progress doesn't announce itself early. It shows up later, quietly, after patience has had time to do its work. Applying this in your life starts with changing how you interpret your current situation. Instead of asking, "Why am I behind?" ask, "What am I building right now?" Even if I can't see it yet? Focus on staying engaged rather than being perfect. Protect your margin, keep your systems simple, and let time work alongside you instead of against you. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Which matters more to you right now? A. Feeling financially secure. B. Feeling free and flexible. Please leave A or B in the comments so everyone can see different perspectives. And if this conversation resonated with you, consider subscribing to Quietly Broke. Your support helps keep honest, thoughtful content like this going.